as well.
That ends general question time. We now move to First Ministers. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I know the First Minister tomorrow, like the rest of us, will be celebrating with all of Scotland a wonderful summer of sport, culminating in Andy Murray's fantastic victory in New York. Yeah. But can I ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of today?
First Minister.
Lots of engagements for the rest of the day, but nothing like as enjoyable, I suspect, as the celebration that we'll jointly engage in tomorrow. Of course, this entire chamber congratulates the amazing feat of Scotland's Olympians and Paralympians, but I think Joanne Lamont is perfectly correct. Given the extraordinary events of this week, we should send our particular congratulations to Mr Andy Murray.
Joanne Lamont.
Can I ask the First Minister, is there anything about independence that the people of Scotland shouldn't know?
Cabinet First Minister.
Well, I think the great thing about independence is increasingly realised across Scotland and beyond. It will give the people of Scotland the ability to determine their own affairs, and that is to mobilise the natural and human resources of this country to create a more prosperous and just society.
Joanne Lamont.
Yesterday, the President of the European Commission was clear when he said, and I quote, "A new state, if it wants to join the European Union, has to apply like any state. That means that the new state of Scotland would first have to apply to be a member of the European Union and, if successful, adopt the euro as our currency." The First Minister doesn't have any legal advice which contradicts the President of the EU Commission, does he?
First Minister.
Well, let's see if I can help Joanne Lamont in these matters, as I tried to help her predecessor. Scotland is not an accession state. We've been members of the European Union for 40 years. For 40 years, every single one of us, even the Conservative Party benches, are citizens of the European Union. Whether they like it or not, every single one of us. We are not in the position of a country which is not part of the European Union.
We will hear the First Minister.
And that means, of course, there have to be negotiations, as I've pointed out in this chamber before. But the crucial point is that these negotiations take place from within the context of the European Union. And since Joanne Lamont seems to have invented a whole range of things which he claims that President Barroso said, he never mentioned the euro in any of his interviews yesterday. Let me tell you something he actually said, which hasn't been so widely quoted. His last sentence: "I see no country leaving and many countries wanting to join. Scotland is part and will remain part of the European Union as an independent country."
Joanne Lamont. I did listen very carefully, but I don't think I detected an answer to the question that I asked. And the SNP's position seems to be predicated on the fact that Scotland would not be a new state. You wonder what they've been arguing for the last 100 years. Now, if the First Minister has advice which does contradict what President Barroso has said, why does he not remove all doubt and publish it? Dialogue between the people and their representatives is essential in a genuine democracy. Those are the wise words this week of Alex Salmond's old deputy and friend, Jim Sillars. But instead of telling the people of Scotland what advice he has hired, he is using our money to fund a court action to stop us knowing what the First Minister knows. The Information Commissioner has ruled, and I quote, "It is in the public interest to know what information is being taken into account in developing policy in such a significant issue as independence." Surely the First Minister believes it's in the public's interest to know the consequences of voting for independence.
First Minister.
Can I just firstly reiterate to Joanne Lamont so she understands there is a difference between a country which has been in membership for 40 years, 40 years of membership of the European Union within that context, and a country which is trying to join the European Union for the first time, like Turkey at the present moment. And can I remind Joanne Lamont from history that even when a country was trying to leave the European Union, as in the case of Greenland, it had to negotiate its leaving from inside the European Union. So quite clearly Scotland is will remain part of the European Union, and the necessary negotiations will take place from within that context. Incidentally, as has been discussed with her predecessor, exactly the same thing applies to the rest of the United Kingdom, who, in the words of Lord Mackenzie Stewart, will be in exactly the same legal boat. Now, Joanne Lamont refers to the question of the publication or acknowledgement of the existence of legal advice. And she must know, because she's been a minister and she's had exactly these things herself, what the Ministerial Code says on the matter, paragraph 2.35. The fact that legal advice has been given to ministers or its existence must not be revealed out with the Scottish Government unless under some clear circumstances. Now, I say to this chamber quite clearly, I've been referred by the opposition parties since I became First Minister 5 times under the Ministerial Code. 5 times. Well, you say not enough. Perhaps, Jackie Baillie, given the track record of nothing out of 5, I would welcome some further referrals. But 5 times these complaints have been comprehensively dismissed by the independent adjudicators on these matters. If I were to breach that paragraph in the Ministerial Code, there would be no defence against it, as indeed every other minister in previous administrations in this Parliament and Westminster has upheld. But I do believe I have a solution for Joanne Lamont, which reconciles my obligations within the Ministerial Code and, I believe, the democratic imperative of information for the people of Scotland. We have set out our intention to publish the White Paper on Independence at this time next year. I give her my guarantee that that White Paper, which sets out the full context of the independence proposition, will contain detailed assessment on the particular question of membership continuing of the European Union. And I give her the guarantee that everything in that document will be fully consistent with the legal advice that we receive. That seems to me a reasonable solution of how we can reconcile the requirements of the Ministerial Code with, I believe, the imperative to let the people of Scotland see the full advantages of being an independent country.
Joanne Lamont. Miss Lamont.
I'm not sure who the First Minister imagines would refer him under the Ministerial Code to give us information that's costing the state £100,000 to keep away
Mr.
from us.
Swinney.
£100,000 to keep out of the public domain. Now, as a minister, I did, I believe, make a bit of a difference. I never, in all of that time, posed a question that we have decided is the most important for 300 years. In those circumstances, I suggest those circumstances are those in which that information usefully could be revealed. Otherwise, one has to ask the question, what has the First Minister got to hide? So we have to get this right. President Barroso is wrong, the Information Commissioner is wrong, Jim Sillars is wrong. Only Alex Salmond is right all the time. No doubt, soon he'll be blaming Mo Farah, Ellie Simmonds and Chris Hoy for unemployment going up in Scotland. Oh no, did that yesterday. What we have, meaningless assertion in the pound has descended into deliberate deception on the euro. While Alex Salmond fails to provide a single shred of evidence, President Barroso does. Scotland would have to reapply to the EU and join the euro with all the disastrous economic consequences that would have. Alex Salmond has to understand that although when he says something his backbenchers agree, we expect more than simple assertion. He refuses to tell the people of Scotland the truth when he is planning to tell them now, never, or when it's too late.
First Minister.
Well,
First Minister.
Can I welcome to her position the new spokeswoman for President Barroso? Fortunately, the actual spokesperson for President Barroso said yesterday that he would like to clarify because there were misrepresentations of what was said in terms of the European Commission's position. No doubt the spokesman will have to clarify the misrepresentations from Joanne Lamont. President Barroso said no such thing. He said exactly what I quoted earlier. I can see no country leaving and many countries wanting to join. Now, Joanne Lamont gives me her personal guarantee what member would report me under the Ministerial Code if I was in clear breach of it. Well, it might be Tavish Scott, Ian Gray, Hugh Henry, Jim Sheridan or Paul Martin. I put it to this chamber. If I was to be reported to the Ministerial Code about tea and biscuits in Bute House, I think I might be reported in terms of a clear breach under these conditions. But I offered, and this is the great disadvantage of reading out the question which you'd prepared before you heard the answers, I offered what I think is a reasonable solution to these matters, to conform to the Ministerial Code and to provide the information that the people wish to have. And that is on the publication of the White Paper, a full year before the decision on the referendum. These areas of continuing European membership for an independent Scotland will be examined in great detail, and everything in that White Paper will be fully consistent and informed by the legal advice that we received. Now, that seems to me a pretty reasonable proposition, and folk in Scotland will be looking forward to reading that White Paper, the passport to independence and freedom.
Question number 2, Ruth Davidson. Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he'll next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
Next week.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, I've got one here that perhaps we won't see you hiding behind any government lawyers, ministerial codes or European spokesmen. But it's something much closer to home. When the First Minister's Deputy, Nicola Sturgeon, launched her new patient management system for Scotland's NHS appointments, she assured us that, and I'm sorry, it's another quote, communicating with patients is one of the areas that I am absolutely determined the NHS will improve on, and this new system will help us to achieve that, at a cost of £44 million. Looking at just one health board, Ayrshire and Arran, we see a system in meltdown, so much so that they've had to cancel more than 7,500 inpatient appointments since its introduction. Cancelled by the Health Authority, not by patients, but by the Health Authority. Does the First Minister still have confidence in this system, from which, from inception to implementation, is entirely the product of his government?
First Minister.
Well, there's a resolution of the issues in terms of the patient management system underway at the present moment. Can I say to Ruth Davidson, the issues with new information technology in the Scottish Health Service pale into insignificance with the extraordinary difficulties that are being experienced by her administration south of the border. But perhaps the test of the management of the Health Service by Nicola Sturgeon were in the wishes in terms of her leaving post last week, because I've got a selection of all of the quotes from RCN Scotland, from the volunteer services, from CEPIS UK, from the Health Economist. Every single one of them complimented Nicola Sturgeon in terms of the fantastic job she did as Scotland's Health Secretary. I've also got a selection of the quotes about Andrew Lansley leaving his post in England, and not a single person, not even his own colleagues, congratulated him on the job he did as English Health Secretary.
Ruth Davidson.
Nicola Bevan got a card, so everything's all right. Fantastic. The figures that are raised in the first question, the 7,500, were shocking. But they're not half the story, First Minister. They're not even a tenth of the story. Because if you look at what's happening in NHS Ayrshire and Arran, from the launch of this system, if you include outpatient appointments, you then get a staggering 110,000 that have been cancelled by the NHS. That's 1 in 8 where people thought that they were going to get help. Suddenly the phone goes and the doctor can't see you now. I'll tell you what else the Deputy First Minister said at the launch of this shambles. This new system will be much more efficient, faster and more secure. It's also better for the environment. Well, it's not better for patients. There is nowhere for the SNP to hide. There is no one else to blame, and don't look south of the border for it. Will the First Minister, for once in his life, take some responsibility, order an investigation into this chaos and get it sorted as a matter of urgency?
First Minister.
The difficulties I've encountered in the process of being sorted, but I'll take responsibility, as will Nicola Sturgeon, for the statistics released last week showing the lowest waiting times in the history of the National Health Service in Scotland and the observance of the key targets in terms of healthcare. And she says, don't look south of the border. Well, why shouldn't we look south of the border? Because the contrast is between a public health service in Scotland performing at an extraordinarily high level for the patients concerned, and a health service which is being dismantled south of the border, which won't even be a national health service at all. So yes, we'll take responsibility. We'll take responsibility for the extraordinary achievements of the staff in our National Health Service, who are performing under extraordinarily difficult budgetary conditions and performing exceptionally well, because this government doesn't have just the commitment to protect the real budget of the National Health Service. Unlike her party, we are committed to having a National Health Service.
Constituency question, Jamie Hepburn.
Very much, Presiding Officer. The Chamber will be aware of the proposed merger between AG Barr, which is based in my constituency, with the Essex-based firm Britvic. Does the First Minister agree with me, given the iconic Scottish brands involved, if any merger does go ahead, such a company should be headquartered in Scotland and that production should remain an ongoing concern at the Cumbernauld site?
First Minister.
Yes, I'm certain that the member is right, of course, as a constituency member, to raise these issues, and quite proper to do so. But he will also know, as I do, I monitored very closely the positive statements from AG Barr in terms of the future of the company if the agreed merger goes ahead. And there's every indication that the strength of and excellence of the history of that company, its iconic status and the excellence of its staff are going to ensure that it remains and expands its operations in Scotland.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
Of issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
No matter what the First Minister says about Europe, there is a great deal of confusion about his plans for Scotland in the EU. A certain something doesn't actually make it true. The First Minister says he's right and Scotland will be a continuing EU member. But what if he's wrong?
First Minister.
Well, I've set out what I think to Joanne Lamont is an excellent way to resolve the request for information in terms of the White Paper. Since Willie Rennie is asking the question, he will have heard his former colleague Lord Wallace support the Scottish Government's position in terms of the legal advice by pointing out he would face exactly the same circumstances as a Westminster minister. So I'm quite certain that Willie Rennie, at least, given Lord Wallace's comments, which I can quote to him if he wishes, will understand that the ability to reconcile the provisions of the Ministerial Code with the imperative of information to the people of Scotland is one where I think assuring that the White Paper will contain the information consistent with legal advice provides a satisfactory solution towards.
Willie Rennie.
But there's clearly a dispute about that legal advice. And if voters opt for independence, they may well find out that we've lost the rebate, we're forced to join the euro, and the Schengen Agreement. That's the reality. That's the consequence. That's the consequence if the First Minister is wrong. So when's he going to get clarity on this? When is he going to start negotiations, discussions with other European Union members about the way ahead on this? Because we need clarity. It can't just be a step in the dark based on his assertions.
First Minister.
Well, I'm slightly perplexed by Willie Rennie. I have to say, not for the first time. I thought the call was for the government to clarify through the publication of legal advice the issue in these questions. He seems to be doubting the legal advice even before its publication. I do think the process of publishing the white paper consistent with legal advice will satisfy even Willie Rennie in terms of the body fees. Now, I've heard a number of extraordinary scenarios put forward, and of course the most popular was that there was lots of countries across Europe, or some countries, who were itching to stop Scotland being a member of the European Union. Well, so you say nobody said that. It's something that's been said before. We've been told that the Spanish were waiting to object to an independent Scotland continuing in membership. Can I therefore point them to the comments of the Spanish Foreign Minister in the 24th of February of this year?
Order, there's just too much chuntering.
In the UK, both parties agree.
Order. First Minister.
Mr Rennie could win a gold medal for chuntering, in my opinion, presiding officer. If in the UK both parties agree it's consistent with their constitutional order, written or unwritten, Spain would have nothing to say, just as it does not affect us. No one would object to the consented independence of Scotland. Now, if that's what the Spanish Foreign Minister can bring himself to say, surely the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats can find it within his heart to see the common sense behind the position that Scotland will be an equal and independent European nation.
Question number 4, Colin Keir.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on impact on business and tourism of having only one carrier between Scottish airports and Heathrow.
First Minister.
Well, our links to Heathrow remain vital for business and inbound tourism. The Scottish Government wants to see a restoration of competition on the routes between Scotland and Heathrow, and would like to see that as soon as possible.
Colin Keir.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. Does he agree that the devolution of air passenger duty, as proposed by the Calman Commission, would also increase competition on Scottish routes and be beneficial not only to my constituents in Edinburgh Western, but to Scotland as a whole?
First Minister.
Yes, I do, and I think there's an overwhelming urgency in this matter. I'll be discussing the issue of aviation policy at the Joint Ministerial Committee meeting in London next week, and I know that the other devolved administrations share my view that air passenger duty would be an important weapon in terms of attracting more direct flights to and from Scotland. Even if there were to be a new runway at Heathrow, and that's a matter of some extraordinary debate within the coalition and indeed within the Conservative Party, and the timescale for that would be extended and elongated, it wouldn't solve the difficulty we have that when Heathrow is clogged up, is blocked, as during the Olympics, then it's not just a case of people having difficulty in getting to Scotland. The people are deterred from actually coming to Scotland as a result of that extraordinary congestion in the Heathrow hub. Therefore, we need more direct flights. One of the ways to ensure getting more direct flights is to use air passenger duty as an important means of doing so. That has broad support, as I said, across the devolved administrations. It has extraordinary support among the carriers. It was actually one of the recommendations of the Calman Commission, and I would hope that I can carry the support of this entire Parliament in making that case in London next week.
John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister is aware of the IAG takeover of BMI and the resultant lack of landing slots available to airlines other than British Airways flying from Glasgow Airport to Heathrow, and the damaging effect this is having on business connectivity to London and elsewhere in the world from Glasgow and the west of Scotland. Does he share my views, and I think he does, that this lack of competition on this route is now unfair as well as damaging to Scottish interests, and can he tell Parliament what he can do and is prepared to do to help restore competition and connectivity on this route?
First Minister.
Well, I share these concerns about the need to restore competition on the Glasgow to Heathrow route. As John Scott will be aware, the situation related to the Glasgow route is different to Edinburgh and Aberdeen, as BA have been the only operator in the Glasgow Heathrow route since April 2011, when BMI withdrew, and thus are not subjected to the competition process, which should help the situation as far as Edinburgh and Aberdeen is concerned. Now, this month, the Scottish Government reiterated our support for the full implementation of the competition remedies in relation to Edinburgh and Aberdeen. At the same time, we will be raising our concerns about the lack of competition on the Glasgow to Heathrow route and what seems to us the mounting evidence that has been detrimental to passengers, both in terms of available space and, in particular, in terms of the prices that people are being asked to pay. So John Scott can be absolutely certain that this subject and the evidence of what has happened to the Glasgow Heathrow route since the absence of competition will be very much part of the presentation that I make to the joint ministerial meeting next week.
Patrick Harvie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In promoting this policy of cutting air passenger duty to stimulate more flights, the Minister, Fergus Ewing, this week and Visit Scotland both admitted to the Committee on Energy, Economy and Tourism that they haven't even bothered exploring the compatibility of this policy with the legally binding climate change targets. Will the First Minister agree to do what Fergus Ewing refused to do and write to the UK Committee on Climate Change asking them to investigate what the climate change impact of this policy would be before he promotes it further?
First Minister.
It's our responsibility to put forward our estimate, and that we'll do so. But can I just put it to Patrick Harvie, if we just take a common sense, and I accept his position, we should build an evidential base for this, apparently, to me, common sense proposition, that if you have a direct flight between two destinations, that in many cases could be more efficient in environmental terms than having to take two flights to the same destination. Now, I thought there's a fairly common sense argument in both environmental, convenience, economic and business terms for direct flights, but I accept that we should build an evidential case, and that is our responsibility, and we shall do so.
Question number 5, Drew Smith.
To ask the First Minister what steps the Scottish Government is taking to address the growing demand for food banks.
First Minister.
Well, it's clear from the recent Citizen Advice Scotland publication that voices from the front line the rising demand for food parcels, that the damaging cuts to welfare being imposed by the UK Government are already having a negative impact on the most vulnerable people in our communities and placing them at greater risk of poverty. The report clearly also underlined the urgent need for decisions about welfare to be taken here in Scotland. The Scottish Government is preparing and doing what we can to protect Scotland from these Tory policies within the powers we have. For example, we are now working closely with COSLA and local authorities individually to develop new arrangements for the Social Fund, which will better support those who repeatedly find themselves in crisis and have to rely currently on food parcels.
Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The reason most often given for needing a food parcel is indeed benefit issues, yet a significant percentage increase last year was also due to unemployment. The Scottish Government has important powers to assist job creation and could do more to promote the living wage to assist the 50% of those receiving food parcels who are actually in work. So when will the First Minister set out his plans with COSLA to use those new powers and resources that he's getting through the successor to the Social Fund, specifically on crisis loans, to tackle a situation which the new head of Citizens Advice Scotland, Margaret Lynch, has rightly described as Dickensian, but which this Parliament should understand as a call to action?
First Minister.
Obviously, we're having the discussions with COSLA with the view of publishing what we're going to try and do. And I think Drew Smith should give some credit to both COSLA and this Government on these matters. After all, it was through these discussions that we found a way to mitigate the harmful impact of the council tax rebate cuts, which have been transferred, of course, council tax benefit to Scotland, but done, as everywhere else, with a 10% cut in the overall amount. And the work we're doing with COSLA to protect people against that cut, I think, should be with some acknowledgement. And that's the same thing we will do as far as looking with COSLA to work to mitigate the impact of the Social Fund. But, you know, I'm going to say to Drew Scott, the belief that we have, I beg his pardon, I was going to say to Drew Smith, the belief that we have the ability to change and mitigate and transform the whole range of benefit cuts that are coming down the road from the UK Government is not possible. The UK Government's benefit cuts, as currently envisaged, and let me say Margaret Curran made the point just last week when saying that they're going to have a brutal effect in Scotland, are of a consequence which is outside the capability in terms of the budgets that we have and the solution to it. And this is what Labour members had better understand. The solution to it is to have control over these matters here in this Parliament so as we can devise policies for the benefit of the Scottish people.
Question number 6, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government will ensure that colleges are in a position to respond to the rise in demand for student places.
First Minister.
Well, despite the cuts which the UK Government is making to the block grant, we are continuing to fund colleges in a way which will allow them to maintain student numbers. Alongside that, and this is a crucial commitment, unprecedented across these islands, that every 16 to 90-year-old in Scotland is guaranteed an offer of a suitable place in education or training through the Opportunities for All programme.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. We've had the news this week that there are more than 10,000 students on waiting lists for college places. According to John Henderson of Scotland's Colleges, the First Minister's government cut the college teaching budget by 8% last year and 10% the year before. According to Larry Flanagan, General Secretary of the EIS, who the First Minister is fond of quoting, he said, "It is clear there has been a reduction in funding to colleges and no amount of sleight of hand on the part of the government can alter that." Given the soaring demand for college places, will the First Minister ensure that the college's budget is protected from any further cuts?
First Minister.
Say about the survey that's quoted by Murdo Fraser. I mean, college places are still available in Scotland. Let's look specifically. One of the colleges mentioned in the Herald this week as having a significant waiting list is now advertising places across the national press, across a broad range of sources. The key commitment that we have given and we shall stick to is that we shall maintain and sustain student numbers at 116,000 over the coming year, and that, against the circumstances of budget cuts, is an extraordinary commitment. We had yesterday the ability to look at the comparison of numbers employed in Scotland's colleges on a full-time equivalent basis. This is information from the colleges themselves, both in Scotland and England and in Wales. In Scotland, over the period that this government has been in office, there's been a rise of 217 in full-time equivalent staff employed in Scotland's colleges. The position in England is a fall of 18,138. That is a 2% rise in staffing in Scotland compared to a 13% decline in England. So given that the ravages that the Conservative government, with its Liberal allies, is implementing on the colleges in England, I think many people might think that Murdo Fraser has a bay-faced cheek and a brass neck as posing as a champion of Scotland's colleges.
That ends First Minister's questions. We're moving on to our members' business debate, so could those who are not staying for that debate please leave as quickly and as quietly